Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story, everyone. Manhattan, New York, present day. Ethan Cole's finger trembled in the air for exactly 3 seconds before pointing directly at her. Among all the elegant women in the golden ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, among all the perfectly coiffed socialites dressed by renowned designers, his traitorous finger chose the waitress who was balancing a tray of champagne flutes while trying not to trip over her own uniform. Her, Ethan said, his voice echoing through the microphone like a social death sentence. My fiancée is her. The silence that followed was so thick you could cut it with a butter knife. 300 guests from New York's elite turned their perfectly styled heads to stare at Ava Harper, who at that moment dropped not only her tray, but also her composure onto the imported marble floor. The champagne glasses scattered like golden fireworks across the designer heels of Mrs. Whitmore, who shrieked as if she'd been attacked by a rabid pigeon in Central Park. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, Ava shouted, her hazel eyes wide with horror, cheeks red as a Broadway theater curtain. I had no idea you were, like, pointing at me for something. Ethan closed his eyes and wished a portal would open up and transport him to literally anywhere else. Mars seemed appealing right about now. 5 minutes earlier, everything had made sense. His grandfather, Victor Cole, a man who had built a real estate empire with his own calloused hands and legendary stubbornness, had finally played his ultimate card. Either Ethan got married by the end of the year, or he'd lose his inheritance of $500 million to his cousin Dylan, a trust fund party boy who spent money like it was confetti at New Year's Eve. I don't care who, Victor had growled, his steel-gray eyes unwavering, but it has to be someone real, someone with character, no more models or empty socialites. I want to see authenticity in her spirit. And then the society reporter appeared, camera in hand, asking about Ethan's wedding plans, and Grandpa was right there wearing that expression that screamed, do something or lose everything. And Ethan panicked. His eyes desperately scanned the ballroom until they landed on her. Ava Harper wasn't like the other women at the event. While they looked like they'd stepped straight out of a fashion magazine, she looked like she'd stepped straight out of real life. Auburn hair pulled back in a slightly messy bun, a few rebellious strands escaping like they had minds of their own, a waitress uniform that was too big in some places and too snug in others, and those eyes, good heavens, those hazel eyes that seemed to hold stories of a life actually lived. When his finger chose her, it was like his subconscious had made a decision his rational mind would never make. Now, as she knelt on the floor trying to pick up glass shards with her bare hands, Ethan realized the magnitude of his mistake. Ava, a woman's voice cut through the deadly silence. A woman in her 40s with silver-streaked hair pulled back professionally approached quickly, clearly, the supervisor. What happened here? I. Ava looked up first at her supervisor, then at Ethan, then at the 300 people watching her like she was a street performer in Times Square. I think I just got promoted or fired. The jury's still out on this one. A nervous laugh escaped Ethan's lips, then another, and before he could stop himself, he was chuckling like someone who'd completely lost his marbles in the middle of the most important event on New York's social calendar. Are you all right, sir? Ava asked, still on her knees on the floor. Because you kind of pointed at me and announced I was your fiancé. And I've worked here for 3 years, and I'm pretty sure we've never met, unless you're one of those wealthy folks who doesn't notice us regular people, which would actually explain everything. Victor Cole approached with slow, deliberate steps, like a seasoned businessman evaluating a potential deal. His eyes traveled over Ava from head to toe, and Ethan was certain his inheritance was about to disappear faster than free pizza at a college dorm. But then the old man smiled. Authenticity in her spirit, he murmured, nodding with approval. Outstanding choice, my boy. Absolutely outstanding. And that's how Ethan Cole, heir to a $500 million empire, found himself officially engaged to the most quick-witted and unpredictable waitress in all of Manhattan. The problem was, she didn't know it yet. The bigger problem, neither of them had any clue what they'd just gotten themselves into. 3 hours after the pointing incident, Ava Harper had never been inside a penthouse before, but she was pretty sure they weren't supposed to smell like her grandmother's chocolate chip cookies mixed with expensive cologne and pure panic sweat. She sat on a cream-colored sofa that probably cost more than her annual rent, clutching a cup of coffee that tasted like it had been personally crafted by caffeinated angels in the hills of Columbia. Across from her, Ethan Cole paced back and forth like a caged tiger at the Bronx Zoo, running his hands through his dark hair until it stood up in 12 different directions. Okay, he said for the 15th time, let me explain this again. Please don't. Ava interrupted, crossing her legs and nearly spilling the divine coffee. Because the last 14 explanations made progressively less sense. I think we peaked at explanation number 8, where you mentioned your grandfather might actually be a secret government agent. Ethan stopped pacing. I never said he was a secret agent. You were building up to it. I absolutely was not. He caught himself, took a deep breath, and sat down across from her in a leather chair that probably cost more than her car. Look, Ava, it's just Ava. Nobody calls me Ava Harper except my landlord when the rent's late and telemarketers. Ava, he corrected, and something about the way he said her name made her stomach do a little somersault. Annoying. The situation is complicated, but the solution is simple. Oh, fantastic. Complicated, but simple. My favorite kind of problem. Like advanced calculus or programming a universal remote. Ethan leaned forward, his blue eyes intense. My grandfather controls a $500 million inheritance. If I don't get married by December 31st, it all goes to my cousin Dylan. And Dylan is, imagine, a golden retriever that learned how to use a credit card and developed a serious shopping addiction. Despite everything, Ava snorted with laughter. That's surprisingly specific. Last month, Dylan bought a yacht. He lives in Colorado. Okay, I'm starting to see the problem. Ethan stood up again, resuming his pacing. So, when that reporter asked about my love life and Grandpa was standing right there with that look that says, produce a fiancé or become financially irrelevant, I panicked and somehow my brain decided you were the solution. Your brain has questionable decision-making skills. Tell me about it. He stopped and looked at her directly. But here's the thing. My grandfather liked you. In 3 minutes of watching you handle a public disaster with humor and grace, he was more impressed than he's been with anyone I've ever brought home. Ava set down her coffee cup with deliberate precision. Okay, so let me get this straight. You want me to pretend to be your fiancé so you can inherit $500 million? That's accurately summarizing the situation. Yes. And what do I get out of this arrangement? Ethan pulled out a leather folder and placed it on the coffee table between them. Full medical coverage for you and your family. $100,000 up front. Another $100,000 when we break up after I inherit. Plus, I'll pay off your student loans. Ava's eyes widened. She opened the folder and stared at the contract inside. The numbers looked like they had too many zeros. How do you know I have student loans? Lucky guess. Most people our age do. She flipped through the pages, her mind racing. With this money, she could finally help her mom with her medical bills. Her little sister could go to the college she'd been dreaming about instead of settling for community college. She could stop working 3 jobs just to survive in New York. There's got to be a catch, she said, looking up at him suspiciously. Rich people don't just hand out money like Halloween candy. The catch is that we have to be convincing. My grandfather isn't stupid, and neither is the rest of my family. We'd need to spend time together, go to family events, make people believe we're actually in love. And how long would this charade last? 6 months. Maybe 7. Long enough to convince everyone it's real, then we can have a mutual breakup after I inherit. Ava leaned back against the impossibly soft sofa cushions. This is insane. Completely. I could be a terrible actress. You handled the champagne disaster like a professional comedian. I think you'll be fine. Your family might hate me. My family hates everyone. Don't take it personally. She stared at the contract again. The number at the bottom seemed to glow like a neon sign. Financial freedom, security, the ability to help the people she loved most. If I say yes, she said slowly, what happens next? Ethan's shoulders relaxed slightly. Next, we figure out how to convince the most suspicious, intelligent, and stubborn man in New York that a billionaire's grandson and a waitress from Brooklyn fell madly in love. I'm from Queens. Actually, see? I don't know anything about you. This should be interesting. Ava picked up a pen from the coffee table and twirled it between her fingers. Okay, Ethan Cole, you've got yourself a fake fiancé. As she signed her name at the bottom of the contract, neither of them noticed the slight smile playing at the corners of Victor Cole's mouth as he watched from his study's security monitor. The old man had been in business long enough to recognize when someone was exactly where they were supposed to be, even if they didn't know it yet. 1 week later, Central Park, New York. Ethan Cole had planned what he thought was the perfect fake first date. Romantic, but not too intimate. Public enough to be seen by the right people. Expensive enough to impress his family's spies who were undoubtedly watching from somewhere in the shadows. What he hadn't planned for was Ava Harper showing up in ripped jeans, combat boots, and a vintage band t-shirt that read to be mild in faded letters. You said casual, she said. noting his expression as she approached the boat rental dock. Ethan stood there in perfectly pressed khakis and a polo shirt that probably cost more than her entire outfit combined. "I said casual Manhattan date," he replied, trying not to smile. "There's a difference." "Oh, right. I forgot. Casual for rich people means you only wear one designer label instead of 3. Ethan handed the boat rental attendant his credit card. "For the record, I'm wearing 0 designer labels today." Ava looked him up and down skeptically. "That polo shirt screams Ralph Lauren. It's possible it might be Ralph Lauren, and those shoes are definitely Italian leather." "Okay, fine. Maybe I don't know how to dress casual. Sue me. Don't tempt me. I could use the money." As they climbed into the small rowboat, Ethan realized he had made a critical error in judgment. He had assumed rowing a boat would be romantic and easy, like in the movies. What the movies failed to mention was that actual rowing required coordination, upper body strength, and at least a basic understanding of how oars worked. 5 minutes into their journey across the small lake, they were spinning in circles. "Are you doing this on purpose?" Ava asked, gripping the sides of the boat as they narrowly avoided a family of very angry ducks. "No, the boat is defective. The boat is fine. You're rowing like you're trying to drill for oil. I'm doing exactly what the guy at the dock told me to do." "What guy?" "The 1-2-year-old who took your money." Ethan paused mid-row. He said he was 18. Ethan, that kid was definitely in middle school. They spun around again, this time nearly colliding with an elderly couple who were somehow gliding across the water like they were born on boats. The old man shook his head disapprovingly as they passed. "Okay," Ethan said, setting down the oars. "New plan. We swim back to shore. We talk. Get to know each other, like a real couple would." Ava leaned back, apparently unconcerned that they were now drifting aimlessly toward a small island, populated entirely by very territorial geese. "Fine. Tell me about yourself, billionaire boy." "I'm not technically a billionaire yet." "Right. You're just a measly multimillionaire. My heart breaks for your struggle." Despite himself, Ethan laughed. "You're never going to let me forget that I'm rich, are you?" "Not a chance. It's like you being tall or having ridiculously blue eyes. It's just a fact about you. You think my eyes are ridiculous. Ridiculously blue. Like aggressively blue. It's distracting." Ethan felt heat rise in his cheeks. "Your eyes are. They're really nice too." "Nice. Wow. Such poetry. No wonder you're still single." "Hey, I was trying to be genuine. Try harder." A goose honked loudly from the nearby island. As if agreeing with Ava's assessment, Ethan picked up the oars again, determined to at least get them away from the waterfall jury. "Okay, your turn," he said, managing to propel them forward in something resembling a straight line. "Tell me about the real Ava Harper. The real me is sitting right here making fun of your rowing technique. Come on, I'm serious. What do you do when you're not serving champagne to people who probably don't deserve it?" Ava was quiet for a moment, trailing her fingers in the water. Actually, freelance articles, blog posts, the occasional short story that gets rejected by magazines." "What kind of articles?" "Human interest stuff. Mostly stories about real people doing interesting things. Like the guy who started a community garden in an abandoned lot in Queens, or the teacher who's been buying school supplies for her students for 20 years with her own money." Ethan stopped rowing, genuinely interested. "That sounds amazing. It doesn't pay much. Which is why I also work at the plaza and do social media consulting for small businesses, and sometimes I walk dogs for rich people who are too busy to take care of the pets they bought on impulse." "You walk dogs. Your lifestyle is showing again, Ethan." "Yes, some people pay other people to walk their dogs." "No, I think it's great. I never thought about it. Most people like you don't. People like me. People who've never had to choose between paying for groceries or paying for gas." The boat drifted in comfortable silence for a moment. Ethan found himself studying Ava's face. The way she looked at the water, the small scar above her left eyebrow, the way she bit her lower lip when she was thinking. "What's the scar from?" he asked. She touched her eyebrow automatically. "Skateboarding accident when I was 12. My sister dared me to try a trick I had no business attempting." "You have a sister?" "Emma. She's 19, going to college in the fall. Pre-med if she can afford it." "Is that why you took this job? To help with her tuition?" Ava looked at him directly, her hazel eyes serious. "That's part of it. My mom's been sick, and the medical bills are substantial. Emma's brilliant, but brilliance doesn't pay for college, and I want to write full-time someday. But right now, that's a luxury I can't afford." Ethan felt something shift in his chest. A weight he hadn't expected. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. Why would you? We're strangers pretending to be in love for money. It's not exactly a foundation built on deep personal sharing." Before Ethan could respond, their boat bumped gently against the dock. They had somehow managed to complete a full circuit of the small lake without either drowning or being attacked by geese. "Well," Ava said, stepping onto the dock with considerably more grace than Ethan managed, "that was definitely a unique first date experience. Are you saying it was bad?" "I'm saying it was memorable and honestly more fun than most of my real first dates." As they walked back toward the park entrance, Ethan found himself hoping that the photographers his family had undoubtedly hired gotten good shots, not for the sake of the charade, but because he wanted to remember this afternoon. "Same time next week?" he asked as they reached the street. "Same time next week," Ava agreed. "But next time I'm picking the activity, what do you have in mind? Something you'll be terrible at." Ethan grinned. "I can't wait." As he watched her disappear into the subway station, Ethan realized that for the first time in years, he was actually looking forward to something. The fact that it involved spending time with his fake fiancée was a complication he wasn't quite ready to examine. 3 blocks away, Victor Cole lowered his binoculars and smiled. His grandson was in more trouble than he realized, and Victor couldn't be happier about it. 2 weeks later, Cole family estate, the Hamptons. Ava Harper had seen wealth before. She'd served champagne to billionaires, cleaned penthouses that cost more than small countries' GDP, and walked dogs whose accessories had higher price tags than her car. But nothing had prepared her for the Cole family estate in the Hamptons. The mansion rose from perfectly manicured grounds like something out of a fairy tale written by someone with serious money issues. Wraparound porches, towering columns, and enough windows to supply a small city. The circular driveway could have accommodated a small airport, and the fountain in the center featured what appeared to be dolphins made of actual marble. "You grew up here?" Ava asked, staring up at the imposing structure as Ethan's BMW crunched to a stop on the gravel. "Summers mostly," Ethan replied, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Christmas breaks. Anytime my parents wanted to remind me about family legacy and responsibility to the Cole name." "And how did that work out for them?" "Well, I'm currently paying a waitress to pretend to be my fiancée. So, I'd say their parenting strategy had mixed results." Ava unbuckled her seatbelt but didn't move to get out of the car. "Ethan, I have to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest." "Okay. On a scale of 1 to 10, how likely is it that your family will see right through this and I'll end up accidentally confessing everything before dessert?" Ethan considered this seriously. "Well, my cousin Dylan has the observational skills of a particularly unobservant rock, so he's not a concern. My Aunt Beatrice thinks anyone who makes less than 7 figures annually is basically invisible, so she won't even really look at you closely enough to be suspicious. That's weirdly comforting. My Uncle Harold will try to quiz you about stock portfolios and investment strategies, but he does that to everyone, including the mailman and your grandfather." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "Grandpa is complicated. He's the smartest person I've ever met, and he has this way of seeing straight through people's pretenses. But he also really wants me to be happy. And for some reason, he seems to think you might be the key to that. No pressure or anything. The good news is that he already likes you. The bad news is that the rest of my family is going to assume you're a gold digger and treat you accordingly." Ava straightened her shoulders and checked her reflection in the side mirror. She'd borrowed a dress from her friend Lena, a simple black number that was elegant without being flashy. Her hair was pulled back in a low bun, and she'd practiced her. "I'm definitely not here for the money smile in the mirror for an hour that morning." "All right," she said, opening the car door. "Let's go convince your family that you fell madly in love with the help." The front door opened before they reached it, revealing a woman in her 50s with perfectly styled blonde hair and a smile that seemed to have been professionally calibrated to convey warmth while revealing nothing. "Ethan, darling," she exclaimed, air-kissing both his cheeks, "and you must be Ava. I'm Evelyn Cole, Ethan's aunt." "It's so nice to meet you, Mrs. Cole," Ava replied, offering her hand. Evelyn looked at the offered handshake like it was a particularly exotic species of bug. "Oh, we're huggers in this family, dear." She pulled Ava into an embrace that felt like being hugged by a very expensive mannequin. They were ushered through a foyer that featured a chandelier roughly the size of Ava's entire apartment, and into a living room where the rest of the Cole family had assembled like well-dressed vultures. Victor Cole sat in a leather armchair that looked like it had been designed for royalty. his steel-gray eyes taking in everything with the sharp attention of a man who'd built an empire by never missing a detail. He smiled warmly when he saw Ava, which earned several surprised glances from the other family members. "Ava, my dear," he said, standing to greet her. "Welcome to our home. Thank you for having me. Mr. Cole, your home is absolutely beautiful. Please call me Victor. We're family now, after all." A woman with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun snorted delicately from her position on the sofa. This had to be Beatrice based on Ethan's description. She was examining Ava like a scientist, studying a particularly disappointing specimen. "So Ava," Beatrice said, her voice honey-sweet with an underlying edge, sharp enough to cut glass, "Ethan tells us you work in hospitality." "I do," Ava replied evenly. "I've been with the plaza for 3 years. How service-oriented of you." Beatrice's smile could have frozen champagne. "And what are your long-term career goals?" Ethan tensed beside her, but Ava had dealt with condescending rich people before. "I'm actually a writer. I freelance for several publications focusing on human interest stories." "Oh, how creative," Evelyn chimed in. "Harold, didn't your secretary mention she wanted to be a writer, too?" Harold Cole, a man who looked like he'd been carved from expensive marble in disappointment, barely glanced up from his phone. "Yes, something like that. Tell me, Ava, what's your position on municipal bond diversification?" "I think it's very municipal," Ava replied, shooting Ethan a look. Harold nodded, as if this made perfect sense. "Exactly what I told Johnson at the country club." From the corner of the room, a young man who looked like Ethan's less successful twin laughed loudly. Dylan Cole was sprawled across a leather chair, already 3 drinks deep, despite it being barely past noon. "Oh, come on, everyone," Dylan said, gesturing broadly with his whiskey glass. "Stop interrogating Ethan's girlfriend like she's applying for a job. Although technically, I guess she kind of is, right? Dating a Cole comes with certain responsibilities." The room went very quiet. Victor's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Dylan," Ethan said, his voice warning. "What?" "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. She seems nice enough. But let's be realistic about the situation here." Ava felt her cheeks burn, but before she could respond, Victor Cole's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Dylan," the old man said, his tone deceptively calm, "perhaps you'd like to explain exactly what you think the situation is." Dylan, apparently too drunk or too stupid to recognize the danger he was in, waved his glass again. "Come on, Grandpa. She's a waitress from Queens, Brooklyn." Ava corrected automatically, then immediately wished she hadn't. "Brooklyn, whatever. And suddenly, she's engaged to the heir to a $500 million fortune. I'm not saying she's a gold digger." But he shrugged as if the implication was obvious. The silence that followed was so complete that Ava could hear her own heartbeat. She felt exposed like everyone in the room was seeing right through her carefully constructed facade, because Dylan wasn't wrong exactly. She was here for money, just not in the way he thought. "Dylan," Victor said, his voice now carrying the full weight of his authority, "you will apologize to Ava immediately, or you will leave my house." "Grandpa, I'm just now." Dylan looked around the room as if expecting support, but found only carefully averted gazes. Even Beatrice seemed suddenly fascinated by her manicure. "Fine." Dylan muttered. "Sorry, Ava. I didn't mean anything by it." "It's okay," Ava said quietly, though it definitely wasn't. Victor wasn't finished. "Furthermore, Dylan, since you seem to have opinions about who deserves to be in this family, let me share some facts with you. Ava works 3 jobs to support her family. She's putting her sister through college. She volunteers at a community center in Queens on weekends, teaching kids to read. She's written articles that have been published in the New York Times and Washington Post, focusing on stories about people who actually contribute something meaningful to society." Ava stared at Victor in shock. How could he possibly know all of that? Meanwhile, Victor continued, his gaze never leaving Dylan. "Your most significant contribution to society in the past year was buying a yacht that you've used exactly once and nearly sinking it in a marina because you couldn't be bothered to learn basic navigation." Dylan's face had gone completely red. "That's not I mean. The yacht thing was expensive and pointless, much like most of your decisions." Victor finally looked away from Dylan, his expression softening as he turned to Ava. "My dear, I apologize for my grandson's behavior. Some people mistake privilege for character, which is an error I clearly failed to correct in his upbringing." "Thank you," Ava managed, still trying to process how Victor knew so much about her life. Ethan reached over and took her hand, squeezing gently. "Grandpa's right, Dylan. Ava is amazing. And if you can't see that, It's your loss." The touch of Ethan's hand was warm and reassuring. And for a moment, Ava almost forgot they were acting. The way he looked at her when he said she was amazing seemed so genuine that her heart skipped a beat. "Well," Evelyn said brightly, clearly desperate to change the subject, "shall we move to the dining room? Lunch is ready." As they filed out of the living room, Victor fell into step beside Ava. "I hope you'll forgive Dylan," he said quietly. "He's not malicious, just thoughtless, and perhaps a bit threatened by the idea that someone might earn their place in this family through character rather than birthright." "How did you know all those things about me?" Ava asked. Victor's eyes twinkled. "My dear, when someone is going to become part of my family, I make it my business to know who they really are. I'm quite impressed with what I found." Ava felt a stab of guilt. Victor was being so kind, so welcoming, and here she was lying to him about everything that mattered. "I hope I don't disappoint you," she said, meaning it more than she expected to. "I don't think that's possible," Victor replied with a warm smile. Lunch was a surprisingly pleasant affair, once Dylan had been banished to the pool house to think about his attitude. Beatrice remained coolly polite, asking pointed questions about Ava's background and family connections. But Victor and Evelyn seemed genuinely interested in getting to know her. Ava found herself telling stories about her work at the plaza, her writing, and her family. Ethan jumped in with details about their courtship that were surprisingly believable, describing their first meeting with such romantic embellishment that Ava almost started believing it herself. "And when I saw her pick up those champagne glasses with such grace and humor, even after I'd completely embarrassed her," Ethan said, smiling at Ava across the table, "I knew I had to get to know her better." "It was pretty mortifying," Ava agreed. "But Ethan was so sweet about it. He sent flowers to the hotel the next day with a note apologizing for putting me in such an awkward position." This was, of course, completely untrue. Ethan had sent exactly 0 flowers, but the story seemed to charm Evelyn, who sighed romantically. "That's so thoughtful, Ethan. I always said you got your grandfather's romantic streak." "I don't have a romantic streak," Victor protested, but he was smiling. "You courted Grandma Eleanor for 2 years before she agreed to marry you," Ethan pointed out. "That wasn't romance. That was persistence. There's a difference. You wrote her a poem every week for 6 months. Those weren't poems. They were structured expressions of admiration." Ava laughed, despite herself. "That sounds pretty romantic to me, Victor." "See?" Ethan grinned. "Ava gets it." The afternoon continued with a tour of the estate, during which Ava tried not to gawk at the indoor swimming pool, home theater, and library that looked like something out of a movie about British aristocrats. Ethan stayed close beside her, pointing out childhood hiding spots and sharing stories that painted a picture of a lonely kid in a beautiful prison. As the sun began to set, they found themselves alone on the back terrace, overlooking gardens that probably required a team of 12 gardeners to maintain. "That wasn't as bad as I expected," Ava said, leaning against the stone balustrade. "Dylan was worse than I anticipated, but you handled it perfectly," Ethan replied. "I'm sorry about what he said. He was completely out of line. He wasn't entirely wrong, though." Ethan turned to face her. "What do you mean?" Ava was quiet for a moment, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "I am here for money, Ethan. Maybe not the way Dylan thinks, but I'm still here because you're paying me to be. Ava, your grandfather seems like such a good man, and he's being so kind to me, and I feel terrible about lying to him." Ethan moved closer, his voice gentle. "You're not just here for money. You could have said no to this whole crazy scheme. You're here because you care about your family, because you're trying to build a better life for the people you love. That's not being a gold digger. That's being a good person in an impossible situation." Ava looked up at him, surprised by the intensity in his blue eyes. "When did you become so wise?" "I've been spending time with this amazing woman who's teaching me to see things differently." For a moment, they just stood there looking at each other, the fake engagement and the money and all the complications falling away. Ava felt drawn to him in a way that had nothing to do with their arrangement and everything to do with the way he made her laugh, the way he listened when she talked, the way he stood up for her when Dylan was being an ass. "Ethan, she started to say, but was interrupted by Victor's voice from behind them. "I hate to interrupt," the old man said, stepping onto the terrace, "but I wanted to have a word with both of you before you head back to the city." They turned to face him, and Ava was struck by how serious his expression had become. "I know this is unconventional," Victor said, "but I wanted to discuss the wedding timeline." Ava's heart stopped. "The wedding timeline. Well, yes. If you're going to be married by the end of the year, we need to start making arrangements. I was thinking perhaps October. That would give us enough time to plan something appropriate without feeling rushed. Ethan and Ava exchanged panicked glances. In all their planning, they had somehow failed to discuss the actual logistics of a fake wedding. October sounds great, Ethan said weakly. Wonderful, Victor beamed. I'll have Evelyn start reaching out to venues tomorrow. I'm thinking we should aim for something elegant, but not ostentatious. Perhaps the botanical gardens or that lovely vineyard upstate that the Ashfords used for their daughter's wedding. As Victor continued planning their fake future, Ava felt a growing sense of dread. This had started as a simple business arrangement, but it was spiraling into something much more complicated. And the way Ethan was looking at her, like he was just as confused about where the pretending ended and reality began, wasn't helping matters. I should probably get Ava back to the city, Ethan said eventually. It's been a long day. Of course, Victor agreed. Ava, my dear, thank you for a lovely afternoon. I hope you'll consider this your second home. As they said their goodbyes and made their way back to the car, Ava's mind was racing. October was only 3 months away. 3 months to maintain this charade. To keep pretending to be in love with a man who was making it increasingly difficult to remember why it was supposed to be pretend. So, Ethan said as they pulled out of the circular driveway, we're apparently getting married in October. Apparently. So any thoughts on flowers, because I have a feeling Evelyn is going to ask. Despite everything, Ava laughed. I've always liked peonies. Peonies it is. As the mansion disappeared behind them, neither of them mentioned the obvious problem that somewhere between the boat disaster and standing up to Dylan and planning a fake wedding, their fake relationship had started feeling remarkably real, and neither of them was quite sure what to do about it. 6 weeks later, various locations across Manhattan, the wedding planning had taken on a life of its own, like a beautiful, expensive monster that demanded constant feeding. Evelyn Cole had transformed into a bridal general, coordinating vendors with military precision and treating Ava's opinions as adorable suggestions rather than actual decisions about her own wedding. Ava stood in the middle of Kleinfeld Bridal, surrounded by enough white fabric to outfit a small army of ghosts, wondering how her life had become so surreal. The dress she was currently wearing cost more than her annual salary, and according to the enthusiastic consultant, it was just a starting point. The beadwork on this Vera Wang is absolutely exquisite, gushed Priscilla, the bridal consultant who spoke about wedding dresses the way art critics discussed Renaissance masterpieces, and see how it accentuates your natural waistline. Divine. Through the mirrors, Ava could see Ethan sitting in one of the plush chairs designated for grooms, looking like he'd rather be literally anywhere else. His tie was loosened, his hair disheveled from running his hands through it, and he was staring at his phone with the expression of a man watching his bank account drain in real time. What do you think, honey? Ava called out, using the pet name they'd been practicing. It still felt strange on her tongue, like a foreign language she was learning to speak. Ethan looked up, and for a moment his expression went completely blank. Then something shifted in his eyes, something that made Ava's stomach flutter in a way that had nothing to do with the tight corset of the wedding dress. You look, he started, then stopped, clearing his throat. You look beautiful, really beautiful. The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. Over the past 6 weeks, they'd gotten better at the fake couple routine, but there were still moments when something real slipped through, moments that left both of them confused and a little breathless. This one is lovely, Evelyn declared from her position on the opposite side of the seating area where she'd established a command center complete with wedding planning binders, fabric swatches, and what appeared to be a color-coded spreadsheet. But perhaps we should try the Oscar de la Renta next. I've heard wonderful things about their new collection. Ava caught Ethan's eye in the mirror and saw her own exhaustion reflected back at her. They'd been doing this dance for hours, trying on dresses, discussing flowers, tasting cakes, choosing invitations, all for a wedding that was never going to happen. The guilt was eating her alive. Actually, Ava said, stepping down from the platform, I think I need a break. All these beautiful dresses are making me a little overwhelmed. Of course, darling, Evelyn said, not looking up from her spreadsheet. Wedding planning can be quite intense. Why don't you and Ethan go get some coffee? I'll stay here and narrow down the options. As they escaped into the relative sanity of the Manhattan sidewalk, Ava took a deep breath of exhaust-scented air and immediately felt better. I thought she was going to make me try on every dress in the store, she said, falling into step beside Ethan as they walked toward a nearby coffee shop. She might still do that. Evelyn doesn't believe in leaving any stone unturned, especially when she's spending someone else's money. Your money, you mean? Technically, it's Grandpa's money until I inherit, but yes. Ethan held the door open for her, as they entered a small cafe that smelled like coffee beans and possibilities. "Are you okay? You seem, I don't know, more stressed than usual." Ava ordered a large coffee with an extra shot of espresso, which felt appropriate given her current life situation. "I'm fine, just tired." "Ava." Something in his voice made her look at him more closely. Over the weeks, she'd gotten to know his different tones. Playful Ethan, business Ethan, dealing with his family Ethan. This was concerned Ethan, and it made her chest tighten. "I'm fine, really," she repeated, but even to her own ears, it sounded hollow. They found a table in the back corner away from the bustle of caffeine-dependent New Yorkers. Ethan leaned forward, his blue eyes serious. "Talk to me. What's really going on?" Ava wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, using the warmth to ground herself. "It's just all of this is becoming very real, isn't it? The dress shopping, the venue booking, the caterer meetings. Your grandfather is so excited about this wedding, and your Aunt Evelyn has probably already ordered the flowers. And that's bothering you? Isn't it bothering you?" she countered. "We're planning this elaborate, expensive wedding for hundreds of people, and it's all based on a lie. Your family is investing time and money and emotional energy into something that's never going to happen." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, stirring his coffee with unnecessary concentration. "I've been thinking about that, too," he admitted, and I don't know what to do about it." He looked up at her, and she saw her own confusion reflected in his expression. 6 weeks ago, this seemed straightforward. Fake engagement, fake wedding planning, real inheritance, clean break. But now I look forward to seeing you every day. I've memorized the way you laugh when you think something is genuinely funny versus when you're just being polite. I know that you tap your fingers on tables when you're nervous, and that you have strong opinions about coffee shop music, and that you get this little crease between your eyebrows when you're concentrating on something. Ava's heart was doing acrobatic feats in her chest. "Ethan, I know we're supposed to be pretending, but somewhere along the way I stopped pretending, at least on my end." He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "Tell me I'm not crazy. Tell me you feel it too." The honest answer was yes. She did feel it. She felt it when he texted her good morning every day, even though no one was watching. She felt it when he remembered that she didn't like mushrooms and always ordered pizza with half-plain cheese when they were working late on wedding planning. She felt it when he listened to her stories about her writing with genuine interest, asking follow-up questions that showed he was really paying attention. She felt it when he looked at her like he was looking at her now, like she was something precious and unexpected. But feeling it and acknowledging it were two very different things. "This is complicated," she said finally. "I know. We have a contract. I know. And your inheritance?" "Forget the inheritance for a minute," Ethan interrupted. "Just tell me how you feel." Before Ava could answer, her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it automatically, then felt the blood drain from her face. The message was from Dylan Cole, and it consisted of 3 photos and a short message. "Interesting research project. Grandpa might find this fascinating." The photos showed Ava coming out of her apartment building, Ava at her second job walking Mrs. Patterson's poodle, and most damning of all, Ava at the community center where she volunteered with a timestamp from before she'd ever met Ethan. The implication was clear. Dylan had been investigating her, and he'd found something that could destroy everything. "What is it?" Ethan asked. Noting her expression, wordlessly, Ava handed him the phone. She watched his face go through a series of emotions. Confusion, recognition, and finally cold anger. That son of a high taught himself. Took a deep breath. "When did he send this?" "Just now." Ava's voice came out smaller than she intended. "Ethan, if he shows these to your grandfather, he won't. How can you be sure?" "Because I'm going to talk to him." "And say what?" "Dylan's not wrong. Your grandfather thinks we met at the plaza and fell in love naturally. If he finds out that you knew where I lived and worked before we ever officially met, he'll put the pieces together." Ethan was already standing up, his jaw set in a way that suggested Dylan Cole was about to have a very unpleasant conversation. "Ethan." "Wait." Ava grabbed his arm. "Don't do anything rash. Let me think about this." "There's nothing to think about. Dylan is trying to blackmail us, and I'm not going to let him. But what if he's right to be suspicious? What if we've been kidding ourselves, thinking we could pull this off?" Ethan sat back down, but she could see the tension radiating through his entire body. "Is that what you think? That we're kidding ourselves? I don't know what I think anymore." The words came out in a rush. 6 weeks ago, I thought I knew exactly what this was. A business arrangement, a way to help my family and secure my future. But now everything is so confused and I can't tell what's real and what's just us being good at pretending. This feels pretty real to me, Ethan said quietly. But that's the problem, isn't it? We're so busy pretending to be in love that we've convinced ourselves we actually are. But what happens when the pretending stops? What happens when you inherit your grandfather's money and we don't need each other anymore? Ethan leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. I don't know. I wish I had a good answer for that, but I don't. Ava's phone buzzed again. Another message from Dylan. Family dinner tonight. Hope to see you both there. Should be an interesting evening. He's not going to wait, Ava said, showing Ethan the new message. He's going to tell everyone tonight. Then we need to get ahead of this. How? Ethan was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Then his expression shifted, becoming determined in a way that made Ava nervous. We tell them first. Tell them what? The truth, or at least part of it. Ava stared at him like he'd suggested they rob a bank. Are you insane? If we tell your family that this engagement is fake, you lose your inheritance. That was the whole point of this arrangement. Maybe the inheritance isn't worth lying to the people I care about. Ethan, think about what you're saying. That's $500 million. I know how much money it is. His voice was steady, but she could see the conflict in his eyes. But I also know that I can't keep lying to my grandfather. He's been nothing but kind and welcoming to you. And he's genuinely excited about this wedding. If Dylan exposes us tonight, it's going to break his heart. And if we tell him ourselves, it won't? It might hurt less coming from us than from Dylan. Ava felt like the walls of the small coffee shop were closing in on her. I need some air. She stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over her chair in her haste to get outside. The Manhattan sidewalk was crowded with afternoon foot traffic, but she barely noticed as she paced back and forth in front of the cafe. Ethan followed her out, giving her a moment before approaching. Hey, he said gently. Talk to me. I can't do this, she said, turning to face him. I thought I could, but I can't. I can't sit in a room with your family and confess that I've been lying to them for weeks. I can't watch your grandfather's face when he realizes that the woman he welcomed into his home was just there for money. Ava and I can't keep pretending that this she gestured between them, that whatever this is between us is real when it started as a business transaction. Ethan stepped closer, his expression intense. What if it is real? How can we possibly know that we met under completely artificial circumstances? Everything about our relationship has been performance and planning and pretending. How do we separate what's genuine from what's just us being good actors? Maybe we can't, Ethan said. Maybe that's not the point. What do you mean? I mean, maybe it doesn't matter how this started. Maybe what matters is how we feel now. In this moment, when no one is watching and there's no audience to perform for, Ava looked at him. This man who had somehow become so important to her in such a short time, standing there on a busy Manhattan sidewalk with wedding dress, shopping behind them and family dinner ahead of them. She realized that Dylan's threats weren't really the problem. The problem was that somewhere along the way, she had fallen for Ethan Cole, and she had no idea if what she was feeling was real or just the result of 6 weeks of very convincing make-believe. I need to go, she said suddenly. Ava, please, I need to think. I need to figure out what I'm going to say tonight. How I'm going to handle Dylan. What I'm going to do about. She gestured helplessly between them again. We can figure this out together. No, we can't because you're not thinking clearly either. You're willing to give up $500 million rather than hurt your grandfather's feelings, which is either incredibly noble or incredibly stupid. And I can't tell which. Ethan's jaw tightened. So, you think I should keep lying to him? I think you should think about what you're throwing away. That money could change your life. My life doesn't need changing. Yours does. The words hit her like a slap. What's that supposed to mean? It means that you're the one with student loans and medical bills and a sister who needs tuition money. You're the one working 3 jobs just to survive in this city. I could walk away from the inheritance and still be fine. You can't. So now I'm the gold digger that Dylan thinks I am. That's not what I meant. And you know it. Do I? Because right now, it sounds like you think I'm only in this for the money. Aren't you? The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Ava felt tears prick at her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. 6 weeks ago, yes, she said quietly. 6 weeks ago, I was absolutely in this for the money. But things change, Ethan. People change. Feelings change. Then why are you walking away? Because I don't know if they've changed enough. She took a step back, putting more distance between them. I need to go home. I need to think about what I'm going to say to Dylan and to your family and to myself. Ava, Wait, but she was already hailing a taxi, already climbing into the back seat, already giving the driver her address. Through the rear window, she could see Ethan standing on the sidewalk, watching her leave with an expression that looked like heartbreak. As the taxi pulled into traffic, Ava allowed herself exactly 30 seconds to cry. Then she wiped her eyes, pulled out her phone, and started composing a text message to Dylan Cole. If he wanted to play games, she was going to make sure she knew the rules. Meanwhile, across town, Dylan Cole sat in his overpriced apartment, surrounded by empty takeout containers and the kind of expensive alcohol that people bought when they wanted to feel important. The photos he'd taken of Ava were spread across his coffee table like evidence in a crime scene, and his laptop was open to a private investigator's report that had cost him more than most people made in a month. He'd been suspicious of Ava from the moment Ethan had pointed at her in that ballroom. The whole thing was too convenient, too coincidental, and Dylan might not be the sharpest tool in the Cole family shed, but he wasn't stupid either. The timeline didn't add up. According to the PI's report, Ethan had been to the Plaza Hotel dozens of times in the months before the engagement announcement, always for business meetings that could have been held anywhere. The same Plaza Hotel where Ava worked. The volunteering at the community center was interesting too. Ava had been there every Saturday for 6 months, long enough for someone to establish a pattern to learn her schedule. Dylan took another swig of whiskey and studied the photos again. There was something else bothering him. Something beyond the obvious setup of the engagement itself. His grandfather's reaction. Victor Cole was the most suspicious, careful, calculating man Dylan had ever known. The old man had built an empire by never trusting anyone completely, by always verifying information before making decisions. It wasn't like him to welcome a stranger into the family without extensive vetting. Unless he had done extensive vetting, Dylan opened his laptop and pulled up his grandfather's financial records. Records he probably wasn't supposed to have access to. But what was the point of having a trust fund if you couldn't occasionally abuse the privileges that came with it? There it was, buried in the expenses from 2 months ago, a payment to Consolidated Investigations, the same firm Dylan had used to research Ava. Victor Cole had investigated his grandson's fiancée before Dylan had even thought to be suspicious, which meant either Victor had discovered the same inconsistencies Dylan had found and was playing along for his own reasons, or Dylan sat back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face, or Victor Cole was orchestrating the whole thing. The old man had been complaining for years about Ethan's lack of direction, his failure to settle down, his reluctance to take on family responsibilities. What if Victor had decided to take matters into his own hands? What if the engagement wasn't Ethan's idea at all? Dylan reached for his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number for the private investigator. Mitchell. The gruff voice answered on the second ring. It's Dylan Cole. I need you to dig deeper on that Mitchell girl. I gave you everything I found. Not on her. On who might have hired her. There was a pause. You think someone else is pulling the strings? I think my grandfather is a lot more manipulative than anyone gives him credit for. Dylan was already formulating a plan, a way to turn this information to his advantage. I want to know every financial transaction Ava Harper has made in the past 3 months. Every payment, every deposit, every coffee purchase, and I want to know if any of it connects back to Victor Cole or Cole Enterprises. That kind of investigation is expensive. I don't care what it costs. It'll also take time. Dylan glanced at the clock on his laptop. The family dinner was in 3 hours. How much time? For the kind of detail you're asking for? A few days? Maybe a week? I need something tonight. Tonight I can get you bank records, maybe credit card statements if she's careless about online security. But the detailed financial forensics will take longer. Do what you can. And Mitchell, this stays between us. If my grandfather is playing games, I want to know before anyone else does. After hanging up, Dylan poured himself another drink and walked to the window overlooking Central Park. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. That would have been beautiful if he'd been in the mood to appreciate beauty. Tonight was going to be very interesting. If Ethan and Ava were running a con, Dylan was going to expose them. If Victor was running a con, Dylan was going to figure out how to use it to his advantage. And if everyone was exactly who they claimed to be, well, Dylan was going to be very disappointed in the lack of family drama. He had a feeling disappointment wasn't going to be a problem. Back in Queens, Ava sat in her tiny apartment, staring at her phone and trying to figure out what to say to Dylan Cole that wouldn't make everything worse. Her apartment was a study in careful financial management, furnished with thrift store finds and hand-me-downs, decorated with plants that cost less than $5 each, organized with the kind of precision that came from not having enough space for mistakes. It was humble, but it was hers, and if everything went sideways tonight, it might be all she had left. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "Please don't do anything rash. We can figure this out together." Another buzz, this one from Dylan. "Looking forward to our chat tonight. I think Grandpa will be very interested in what I have to share." And then, surprisingly, a third text from Victor Cole himself. "My dear, I hope you'll join us for dinner tonight. There are some family matters I'd like to discuss." Ava set the phone down and buried her face in her hands. 6 weeks ago, her biggest worry had been making rent. Now she was caught in what felt like a high-stakes game of chess, except she wasn't sure who the other players were or what they were all trying to win. The worst part was that her feelings for Ethan were real, even if everything else about their relationship was built on lies. She tried to convince herself that it was just the result of spending so much time together, of being good at playing a role, but lying here in her own apartment with no audience and no performance required, she couldn't deny it anymore. She was in love with him. She was in love with Ethan Cole. And she had no idea if he was in love with her or just with the idea of rebellion against his family's expectations. Her phone rang, startling her out of her thoughts. The caller ID showed her sister's name. "Hey, Emma," Ava answered, trying to sound normal. "Ava, I have amazing news." Her sister's voice was bright with excitement. "I got the scholarship." For a moment, Ava's brain couldn't process the words. "What scholarship?" "The Cole Foundation Scholarship for Pre-Med Students. It's for full tuition plus living expenses for all 4 years of medical school. Can you believe it?" The phone felt like it was going to slip from Ava's suddenly numb fingers. The Cole Foundation. I know, right? I'd never even heard of them before. But apparently they focus on supporting students from underserved communities who are pursuing healthcare careers. The application process was really thorough. They wanted transcripts, essays, financial information, even a home visit. But I guess I impressed them. Ava's mind was racing. The Cole Foundation, home visit, financial information. "Emma," she said carefully, "when did you apply for this scholarship?" "About 2 months ago. The notification letter says they'll be dispersing the first payment next week." "Ava, this changes everything. I can focus on my studies instead of worrying about money, and Mom won't have to stress about how we're going to pay for my education." 2 months ago, right around the time Ethan had started showing up at the Plaza Hotel for business meetings. "Ava, are you there? Aren't you excited?" I'm very happy for you, Em. You deserve this." "I have to run. I'm meeting with my advisor to plan my course schedule, but I wanted to share the news with my favorite sister first. I'm your only sister. Details. Love you." After Emma hung up, Ava sat in her quiet apartment, staring at her phone and trying to piece together what felt like an increasingly complex puzzle. Victor Cole had investigated her before the engagement. Emma had received a scholarship from the Cole Foundation. Ethan had been at the Plaza Hotel repeatedly before pointing her out as his fiancée. Either this was an incredible series of coincidences, or Victor Cole had been pulling strings from the very beginning. But why? Ava got up and walked to her laptop. Opening a new browser window, a quick search for Cole Foundation scholarships brought up a professional-looking website with photos of smiling students and detailed information about their mission to support promising young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. She clicked through to the scholarship recipients page and found Emma's photo along with a brief bio describing her academic achievements and career goals. It was dated 3 days ago. 3 days ago, when the family drama was just starting to heat up, Ava pulled out her phone and called the number listed on the Cole Foundation website. After being transferred twice, she found herself speaking to a cheerful administrative assistant. "I'm calling about the scholarship awarded to Emma Harper," Ava said. "I'm her sister, and I wanted to thank whoever was responsible for selecting her." "Oh, the Harper Scholarship. That was a special case. Mr. Cole personally reviewed her application and fast-tracked the approval process. Mr. Cole Victor Cole, the Foundation's primary benefactor, he was very impressed with Ms. Harper's essay about wanting to provide health care to underserved communities, said she reminded him of someone he knew. After hanging up, Ava sat back in her chair and tried to process what she'd learned. Victor Cole hadn't just investigated her, he'd actively intervened in her family's life, providing the exact kind of help she'd been desperate to find. The question was whether this was kindness or manipulation, or maybe both. Her phone buzzed with another text from Ethan. "Whatever you're thinking, please talk to me before you do anything." Ava looked at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "What do you know about the Cole Foundation?" The response came quickly. "Grandpa's charity. Why?" "They gave Emma a full scholarship. Applied 2 months ago. Approved this week." There was a long pause before Ethan's next message. "We need to talk in person." "Agreed, but not before dinner tonight. I think it's time we got some answers." "Ava, be careful. If Grandpa has been planning something, then we're about to find out what it is." As Ava got ready for what promised to be the most complicated family dinner of her life, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into a trap. The only question was who had set it, and whether she was the hunter or the prey. That evening, Cole family estate, the Hamptons. The dining room at the Cole estate had been transformed into what could only be described as a battlefield disguised as an elegant dinner party. Crystal chandelier casting warm light over polished mahogany, fresh flowers arranged with military precision, and enough silverware to outfit a small restaurant, all of it serving as the backdrop for what promised to be the most explosive family gathering in Cole history. Ava arrived with Ethan 20 minutes before the scheduled dinner time, both of them having spent the car ride in tense silence, each lost in their own thoughts about what the evening might bring. She'd changed into a navy blue dress that struck the right balance between respectful and confident, though her hands were trembling slightly as she applied lipstick in the visor mirror. "You look beautiful," Ethan had said softly as they pulled into the circular driveway, and something in his voice made her look at him more closely. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his jaw was set in that way. That meant he was preparing for battle. "Ethan, whatever happens tonight, I know." He'd interrupted gently, "Whatever happens, we'll deal with it." Now, as they walked through the familiar front door, Ava felt like she was entering a house of mirrors where nothing was quite what it seemed. Victor Cole greeted them in the foyer, looking distinguished in a perfectly tailored suit, his steel gray eyes warm but somehow calculating. "Ava, my dear," he said, taking both her hands in his and kissing her cheek. "You look lovely. And Ethan, you look like you haven't slept in days. Long week, Grandpa." "Yes, I imagine it has been." Victor's tone was neutral, but there was something underneath it that made Ava's skin prickle with awareness. "Shall we have drinks in the library before dinner? I thought we might chat as a family." The library was Victor's domain, a room lined with first-edition books and dominated by a massive desk that had supposedly belonged to some railroad baron in the 1800s. Evelyn was already there, nursing a glass of white wine and looking slightly nervous. Beatrice sat in a leather chair near the fireplace, her expression as chilly as always. And Dylan was sprawled in a corner armchair, a tumbler of whiskey in one hand and his phone in the other, looking like a cat who'd caught multiple canaries. "Ah, the happy couple," Dylan said, raising his glass in a mock toast. "Perfect timing. I was just telling everyone about my little research project." Ethan stepped slightly in front of Ava, a protective gesture that didn't go unnoticed by anyone in the room. "Dylan, don't what?" "Share interesting information with the family." Dylan's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "I think everyone deserves to know the truth, don't you?" Victor moved to the bar cart and poured himself a scotch with deliberate precision. "What truth would that be, Dylan?" "The truth about how Ethan really met his fiancée." Dylan pulled out his phone and started swiping through photos. "See, I got curious about the timeline, so I did a little digging." Ava felt her heart hammering against her ribs, but she forced herself to remain calm. Whatever Dylan had found, panic wouldn't help. "Dylan," Evelyn said nervously, "perhaps this isn't the time." "Oh, this is exactly the time." Dylan stood up, swaying slightly from the alcohol. "Because according to the Plaza Hotel's security logs, which aren't that hard to access if you know the right people, Ethan had been to the hotel 18 times in the 2 months before the engagement announcement, 18 times for business meetings that somehow always happened when Ava was working. The silence in the room was deafening. Ava could feel everyone's eyes on her, could practically hear their thoughts shifting and recalculating. Furthermore, Dylan continued clearly enjoying himself. "Our sweet little Ava has been volunteering at a community center in Queens every Saturday for 6 months. Same community center that received a rather generous anonymous donation from Cole Enterprises about 3 months ago." Ethan's face had gone completely white. "Dylan, you're drunk. You don't know what you're talking about." "Am I?" "Then explain this." Dylan held up his phone, showing what appeared to be bank records. "Explain why Ava Harper received a payment of $50,000 from a Cole Enterprise subsidiary exactly 1 week after your engagement announcement." Ava's world tilted sideways. She hadn't received any payment from Cole Enterprises. Her contract with Ethan was completely separate, handled through his personal attorney. Either Dylan was lying, or someone else was moving money in her name. "That's impossible," she said, finding her voice. "I never received any payment from Cole Enterprises." Dylan's smile widened. "Are you sure about that? Because I have documentation right here showing enough." Victor's voice cut through Dylan's theatrics like a blade. The old man hadn't raised his voice, but something in his tone made everyone in the room go silent. "Dylan, sit down." "But Grandpa, don't you want to hear?" "Sit down." Dylan sat, his bravado deflating like a punctured balloon. Victor walked to the center of the room, his scotch untouched in his hand. "I think it's time we all had an honest conversation." "Victor," Evelyn said nervously. "What's going on?" "What's going on, Evelyn? Is that my family seems to believe I'm a senile old man who can be easily deceived." His gaze swept the room, landing on each person in turn. "Dylan, your investigation was thorough, but incomplete. You found pieces of the puzzle, but you failed to see the bigger picture." He turned to face Ethan and Ava directly. "And you two have been so busy trying to fool everyone else that you've been fooling yourselves." Ethan stepped forward. "Grandpa, I can explain. Can you?" "Then please explain to me how you think this all started." Ethan and Ava exchanged glances. There was no point in lying anymore. Dylan had already exposed too much. "I needed to get married to inherit," Ethan said quietly, "and I panicked at the charity event. I pointed to Ava without thinking, and then I offered her money to go along with it." "And you, my dear?" Victor asked, looking at Ava. Ava lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly. "I needed money for my family, my mother's medical bills, my sister's college tuition. Ethan offered me a way to help them, so I said yes." "I see." Victor nodded thoughtfully. "And at what point did you both realize you were being manipulated?" The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. "What?" Ethan asked. Victor moved to his desk and opened a leather folder. "Dylan was right about one thing. I did have you investigated, Ava, quite thoroughly, actually. I know about your mother's illness, your sister's academic achievements, your volunteer work, your writing career. I also know about your character, your integrity, and your fierce loyalty to the people you love." He pulled out a photograph and placed it on the coffee table. It showed Ethan entering the Plaza Hotel dated 6 weeks before the engagement announcement. "I also know that Ethan had been visiting the Plaza Hotel regularly, supposedly for business meetings that could have been conducted anywhere." Victor's eyes glinted with something that might have been amusement. "What I found particularly interesting was that these visits always coincided with Ava's shifts. Ava felt like she was falling through space." "You mean he was watching you?" "Yes, my dear. For weeks before that charity gala, my grandson was finding excuses to be near you, studying your schedule, learning your habits. He was quite taken with you, though I don't think he admitted it to himself at the time." Ethan looked like he'd been struck by lightning. That's not I was just what?" Victor asked mildly. "Just coincidentally developing business that required frequent visits to the plaza. Just happening to time those visits to when a particular waitress was working." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, his expression confused and shaken. "I didn't. I mean, I noticed her, but I wasn't deliberately." "Of course you were." Victor's voice was gentle now, almost paternal. "You were smitten, Ethan, completely and utterly smitten with a woman who represented everything you thought you couldn't have. Authenticity, independence, a life built on merit rather than inheritance." Dylan leaned forward, his earlier smugness replaced by confusion. "Wait. So you're saying Ethan was actually stalking her?" "I'm saying Ethan was doing what people have done for centuries when they find themselves attracted to someone they think is out of their league. He was finding excuses to be near her while working up the courage to actually speak to her." Ava turned to stare at Ethan, who was looking at her with an expression of dawning realization and mortification. "The charity gala was supposed to be your opportunity." Victor continued. "I made sure you were both there, created the perfect setup for you to finally make your move. What I didn't anticipate was that my grandson would panic and create this elaborate charade instead of simply asking you to dinner." You set up the whole thing?" Ava asked weakly. "The opportunity?" "Yes. The ridiculous fake engagement scheme was all Ethan's idea." Victor chuckled. "Though I must admit, I found it rather entertaining to watch you both tie yourselves in knots trying to convince me of something I already knew wasn't true." Evelyn set down her wine glass with a sharp clink. "Victor Cole, are you telling me you've been manipulating our family for months?" "I've been trying to help my grandson find happiness," Victor replied calmly. "The manipulation, as you call it, was minimal." A few strategic donations, some carefully timed business meetings, ensuring two people who were clearly meant for each other actually had the opportunity to meet. Beatrice spoke for the first time since the conversation began. And the inheritance threat? Completely real. Ethan does need to get married by the end of the year if he wants his inheritance. Victor's eyes twinkled with mischief. I just made sure he met the right woman first. Dylan slumped back in his chair. So the whole thing was what? Some kind of elaborate matchmaking scheme? In part, yes. But what about the payment? Dylan held up his phone again. The $50,000 from Cole Enterprises. Victor reached into his jacket and pulled out another folder. Yes, that, Dylan. You really should verify your sources before making accusations. He handed Dylan a document. What you found was a scholarship payment to Emma Harper from the Cole Foundation. The account information was similar enough to Ava's that a cursory investigation might confuse the two, but they're completely separate transactions. Dylan's face went red as he read the document. A scholarship for a remarkably bright young woman who wants to become a doctor and serve underserved communities, the kind of person the Cole Foundation was created to support. Victor looked at Ava, though I admit the timing of the approval was influenced by my growing fondness for her sister. Ava felt tears prick her eyes. You gave Emma the scholarship because of me. I gave Emma the scholarship because she deserved it. The timing was because of you. Ethan had been quiet through most of these revelations, but now he stepped forward, his expression intense. Grandpa, are you saying that everything, the investigation, the donations, the charity gala setup, it was all to get me and Ava together? Not everything, Victor said. The part where you fell in love was entirely your own doing. The words hit the room like a physical force. Ethan turned to look at Ava, and she saw in his eyes the same confusion and hope and terror that she was feeling. Ethan started, then stopped, shaking his head. I don't know what's real anymore. Then let me help you figure it out, Victor said gently. He walked to a cabinet and pulled out what appeared to be a video camera. I've been documenting this entire process, you see. Research for a book I'm considering writing about modern matchmaking. He connected the camera to a large screen mounted on the wall, and suddenly the room was filled with video footage of Ethan and Ava over the past 6 weeks. The first clip showed them at the boat rental in Central Park laughing as they spun in circles on the water. Neither of them was performing for an audience. They were just genuinely enjoying each other's company. The second clip was from the wedding dress shopping expedition showing Ethan's face when Ava emerged in the Vera Wang gown. His expression was pure, unguarded admiration, the look of a man seeing the woman he loved in a wedding dress for the first time. The third clip was from just that afternoon outside the coffee shop where they'd argued. Even in the midst of conflict, the way they looked at each other, the way they moved in each other's orbit, spoke of deep connection and genuine care. I've watched you two navigate this fake relationship for 6 weeks, Victor said, as the footage played, and what I've seen is two people who stopped pretending almost immediately, but were too scared to admit it. On screen, Ethan was reaching out to touch Ava's hand during what was supposed to be a business meeting about wedding venues. His gesture completely unconscious and tender. You've texted each other every morning for the past month, Victor continued, not because anyone was watching, but because you wanted to. You've shared stories about your families, your dreams, your fears. You've worried about each other, protected each other, made each other laugh. Another clip showed them walking through Central Park, not posed or performing, just walking and talking like a couple who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. The fake engagement may have brought you together, Victor said, but what developed between you is absolutely real. The room fell silent as the video ended. Ethan and Ava were looking at each other now, really looking as if seeing each other clearly for the first time. Ethan, Ava said softly, when you said you'd been going to the plaza for business meetings, I lied, he said simply. I told myself they were business meetings, but really, I wanted to see you. I wanted to figure out how to talk to you without seeming like some rich guy hitting on the help. And I told myself I was just doing a job, Ava admitted. But somewhere along the way, spending time with you became the best part of my day. Dylan made a disgusted noise. Oh, come on. This is like watching a Hallmark movie. Dylan, Beatrice said sharply. Shut up. Victor smiled, looking pleased with himself. Now then, I believe we have some things to sort out. He turned to Ethan. First, your inheritance. The terms of my will require you to be married by December 31st. It doesn't specify that the marriage has to last any particular length of time, and it doesn't require that it begin as a real relationship. However, it does require that it be legally valid, meaning, if you want your inheritance, you'll need to actually marry Ava. not pretend to marry her, not plan a fake wedding, actually marry her. Ethan and Ava stared at each other. And second, Victor continued, Ava, I'm offering you a position as a staff writer for Cole Communications. Our media subsidiary, full benefits, competitive salary, the opportunity to write the kind of human interest stories you're passionate about. The job is yours, regardless of what you decide about Ethan. Ava's mouth fell open. I what? You're a talented writer, and we need talented writers. This isn't charity. It's good business. Dylan stood up abruptly. This is insane. You're bribing them to get married. I'm giving them options, Victor said calmly. Something I should have done for you years ago, instead of just handing you money and hoping you'd figure out how to be a decent human being. Grandpa Dylan, you spent the evening trying to destroy two people's happiness because you were jealous and petty. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. Victor's voice was stern, but not unkind. You're still my grandson, and I still love you, but it's time you learned that actions have consequences. Dylan's face cycled through several emotions before settling on something that might have been shame. He sat back down without another word. Victor turned back to Ethan and Ava. Now then, I'm going to ask everyone else to leave so you two can have a private conversation. You have a lot to talk about, and you don't need an audience. As the others filed out of the library, Evelyn looking dazed, Beatrice looking thoughtful, Dylan looking deflated, Victor paused at the door. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I've been married for 53 years, and I recognize real love when I see it. What you two have is worth fighting for. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving Ethan and Ava alone in the book-lined room. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. So, Ethan said finally, my grandfather has been playing matchmaker, and we've been idiots pretty much. He moved closer to her, his blue eyes serious. Ava, I need you to know that everything I told you about how I feel, that was real, even if the circumstances weren't. I hoped, but I wasn't sure. She looked up at him, her heart hammering. Ethan, what do we do now? I don't know. I know what I want to do, but I don't want you to feel pressured. The inheritance, the job offer, none of that should factor into your decision. What do you want to do? Ethan reached up and cupped her face gently. I want to marry you. Not for the money, not for the inheritance. Not because my grandfather orchestrated this whole thing. I want to marry you because I love you. The words hung in the air between them, simple and honest and absolutely terrifying. I love you too, Ava whispered. I think I started falling for you during that disaster with the boat, and I've been falling ever since. Ethan's smile was radiant. So, what do you say? Want to turn our fake engagement into a real marriage? Instead of answering immediately, Ava stepped back and looked at him seriously. Ethan, if we do this, it has to be real. Not because of external pressure, or financial incentives, or family expectations. It has to be because we choose each other. Absolutely. And we need time. Real time to get to know each other without all the performance and pretending. How much time? Ava considered this. How about we start with an actual first date? A real one where we're just Ethan and Ava figuring out if we like each other without all the Cole family drama. Ethan laughed. I'd like that, though technically we've already planned a wedding. We can plan another one. A smaller one. Just us and the people we actually want there. What about the inheritance? Ava grinned. Well, your grandfather did say we have until December 31st. That gives us 4 months to figure out if we're actually compatible when we're not trying to fool anyone. Ethan pulled her closer. I already know we're compatible. Oh, really? How's that? Because you make me laugh. You make me think. You make me want to be better than I am. His voice was soft, sincere, and because even when I thought this was all fake, being with you felt more real than anything else in my life. Ava stood on her tiptoes and kissed him, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, she was smiling. So, she said, want to go on a real first date with me, Ethan Cole? I thought you'd never ask. 6 months later, a small chapel in Vermont, the wedding was nothing like the elaborate affair Evelyn had planned. Instead of 300 guests, there were 30. Instead of a ballroom, they were in a rustic chapel surrounded by autumn maples. Instead of a Vera Wang gown that cost more than a car, Ava wore a simple white dress she'd found at a vintage shop in Brooklyn. It was perfect. Victor Cole sat in the front row, looking proud enough to burst. Beside him, Evelyn dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, having fully embraced the role of doting grandmother-in-law. Even Beatrice had softened, particularly after Ava had written a beautifully researched article about the Cole family's philanthropic history for the Times. Dylan was there, too. Surprisingly, he'd spent the past 6 months in what Victor called character rehabilitation, which involved working entry-level jobs at various coal enterprises and learning what it meant to actually earn his place in the family. He looked healthier, happier, and significantly more humble. Emma Harper sat with Ava's mother, both of them crying happy tears. The scholarship had allowed Emma to focus on her pre-med studies, and she was already excelling in her classes. Their mother's medical treatments were progressing well, the financial stress lifted from their shoulders, as Ethan and Ava exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promising to choose each other every day, regardless of external circumstances. Victor smiled to himself. Sometimes, he reflected, the best way to get what you wanted was to create the right conditions and then get out of the way. You may kiss your bride, the minister announced. Ethan cupped Ava's face in his hands and kissed her with all the love and joy and gratitude he felt for this extraordinary woman who had stumbled into his life by accident and stayed by choice. When they broke apart, Ava was glowing. "So, Mrs. Cole," Ethan said softly, "how does it feel to be married to a billionaire's grandson?" "I wouldn't know," Ava replied with a grin. "I married a man who rows boats in circles and laughs at his own jokes. The billionaire's grandson part is just a bonus." As they walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, past the smiling faces of their family and friends, Ava couldn't help but think about that moment 6 months ago, when Ethan had pointed at her in a moment of panic. It had been the best accident of her life. Behind them, Victor Cole was already planning his next matchmaking project. After all, Dylan was still single. And Victor had noticed that the young man had been spending quite a bit of time talking to the new marketing director at Cole Communications. Some things, he mused, never changed, but then again, sometimes that was exactly as it should be. The end. Epilogue. 1 year later, Ava Cole, she still got a thrill from that name, sat at her desk in the Cole Communications offices, putting the finishing touches on her latest article, a piece about successful family businesses and the unexpected ways love could change everything. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "Dina Sue, I have something to ask you." She smiled, typing back. "Another business proposal?" Something like that. Through her office window, she could see the city bustling below, full of people rushing toward their own unexpected futures. A year ago, she had been one of those people struggling to make ends meet, dreaming of a break that seemed impossible. Now, she was living a life she couldn't have imagined, not because of money or status, but because she'd found someone who saw her exactly as she was and loved her for it. Her computer chimed with an email from Victor Cole. "My dear, I hope you're free next weekend. There's someone I'd like you to meet, Dylan's new friend from marketing. I think they might appreciate some advice on navigating Cole family dinners." Ava laughed out loud. Some things definitely never changed, and she was perfectly fine with that.